Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." She said, "I have no husband." And Jesus said, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "let me change the topic of the conversation and talk about theology." I have to admit that now here with our 3rd Sunday in Lent, as we are working through these 7 deadly sins, first pride, then last week, greed and envy put together, that today, as we address lust, I identify with this woman and say, "Jesus, how about I change the conversation? Let's talk about theology." Be a little easier that way. Be a little bit less awkward. Maybe less vulnerable. I have tried to give sufficient warning a few weeks in advance of the sort of folks who thought they ought to be here or perhaps ought not to be here, that I would try to be frank. Not crass or purient, but honest, straightforward, and hopefully true. As I have said for each of these sins, I cannot speak to anyone else's personal experience but my own. And so there will come a point for me to share that too. And that's not super fun, nor is it super easy. But it is true, as are God's mercies. His holy purpose for our sex lives, and for our bodies. His holy mercy as we stumble and as we fall. Though it is easier to change the conversation and talk about theology, I don't want it said, "Well, I never heard that from the pulpit." So here's your chance. For those of us who feel like we need it, for those of us who feel like we don't, if this talk is not for you, you feel like you have passed the boundary for whatever reason, and this is not either a struggle or temptation for you, or you feel like your body is kind of past the point where it's even an issue whatsoever, then it may be an issue to someone else in your life. There may be an opportunity to pass this along. At the very least, we all have a stake in these future generations who are coming up in a world and in a society that is so sexually charged, drenched with sensuality at every turn. It is remarkable, the change even in a generation of what you might find turning on the TV any hour of the day, middle of the day, the sort of things that children might see. Or, and what they used to refer to as the family hour. Do you remember when they even said that? Not just the contents of the shows, even the commercials have a fundamental attribute of appealing to base natures, to appetites, to hungers, and connecting the indulgence of our physical cravings to nearly every commodity, service, or endeavor under the sun. It was only half joke that during the video, as we had some scenes of what were supposed to be alluring or subjective poses that were suggestive by people who were either particularly beautiful or famous, that I ended on image deleted, content inappropriate. Even searching for what seemed like the tamest of images, it was shocking how easy it was to come up with something that was truly and completely inappropriate. How many times have you seen something flash across the TV or on your own computer screen that you were glad that a child or a grandchild was not behind you looking over your shoulder? No longer confined to the wrong side of town or in that seedy bookstore. Pornography accessible instantaneously, anywhere, everywhere, by anyone and everyone. Not even when you're looking for it, it comes looking for you. And it comes looking for your kids and your grandkids. So to speak of lust, this has been my least anticipated sermon of the series. And yet, just looking at the world we live in today, we have to say something. We have to do something. And I need to admit to my part, in which out of either indifference or inaction I allow it to continue. In the ways through action and through failure I have personally contributed. It's not an easy talk, but I think it's the right thing to do. Here's the thing. I don't think lust is just a topic for young people. I think young people in particular need this topic, and if it's not going to come here, it's not going to come now. When will it come? I fear it's not too late. But there is no boundary about, well, it's the time of life, it's the age I happen to be, it's the circumstances I find myself in. Well, I already know all those things, or it doesn't really make a difference to me now, or I'm too old to worry about any of these sorts of things anyway. Like I told the 9 o'clockers, now you think awkward. Try being the youngest person by decades in a room, talking to all of them about sex. And yet, I wanted to mention to them, before we think that this is something that you hit kind of a dividing line and suddenly I cross the threshold and it doesn't matter anymore. One of the counties of the state of Florida with the highest rate increase of sexually transmitted diseases happens to be Sumter County. Little, rural Sumter County in the middle of nowhere. Why? The Villages. The Villages. Because who cares, you know? Pregnancy's not a risk. Maybe I've been widowed for a while. Or maybe I'm just old enough where these aren't things that are a big deal. And yet, there is no age limit. There is no ability limit, for Jesus himself reminds us, not just our physical activities, but when we look at a woman with lust, committing that adultery within our hearts, that lust is not a function of the number of our sexual partners, nor is it a function of the depth of our proclivities. Lust is a function of the brokenness of our souls and the hurts of our hearts. And rare is it we find a person who has not been impacted in one way or another, body or spirit, by these temptations, these difficulties, and their consequences. So here we are. Whether we believe it's a direct issue for us or not, we are interconnected. We are part of the body of Christ, and certainly we are interconnected as neighbors, as part of a civil society. We are helping to raise new generations up, whether they belong to us or are simply influenced, however indirectly, by us. We are responsible for the culture in which we live. In some ways, very small, and in some ways, quite large. So I'm pretty sure it's a talk for everybody. Ultimately, this is an issue because we, as creatures of an almighty and loving God, are body and soul in unity. We are neither one, we are both. Both halves, body and soul, created by God. Both halves, body and soul, loved by God. Both halves, body and soul, redeemed by God. Both halves, body and soul, intended for praise and for worship. Here's the great paradox of lust, if not its outright lie. It's funny how it can do this. And the fact that it goes in opposite directions simultaneously ought to underscore how vicious the lie is. Lust, by its nature, has the tendency to either over or under-emphasize this duality of our created nature. And like I said, sometimes it does it simultaneously. It overemphasizes our physical bodies by saying, these appetites, these hungers, these cravings of your body, you just have to let in. You just have to indulge. You just have to let it all hang out. You are animals. We have needs. You are hungry, so you must consume. Just let your body go because it's so, so, so important. Whether we're trying to be true to ourselves, whether we're trying to follow our hearts, whether we're trying to scratch an itch, or just make ourselves feel good. Our bodies take preeminence and priority over our spirits. And yet, at the same time, this terrible underemphasis on our bodies, and you've heard this too, that it doesn't really matter. Our bodies aren't really that important. Therefore, sex can be indulged in a variety of ways because it's just sex. Right? No big deal. What's the problem? To consenting adults, he said with air quotes. What's the big deal? It's just a little rubbing and touching and it's all good, clean fun? Or what's the big deal anyway? We had a good time. It's a one-night thing. What's the big deal? And the body is underemphasized as though it has no effect. As though it has no meaning. As though we're not created by God. As though we're not His holy temple, which we are told the Spirit dwells in. How precious it is and how much care we ought to take and how it is joined to another. It's as though somehow it doesn't matter what we do with our bodies or what we do with the bodies of others. A fine way to put it in practical terms would be those who say, well, I wonder how far we can push this. I wonder how far I can go. I mean, I don't want to do anything real bad here, so I kind of know that, there's boundaries. I wonder how close I can inch up to that, because so far I kind of like it. Even that, does that not belie that either over or under emphasis on how God has created His body and spirit, loves both body and spirit, desires both body and spirit, built to worship body and spirit? Instead, saying that, well, the important thing is we don't cross this line, but as long as we get up real close to it. The body's important, but the spirit, I didn't act on that intention. How bad could it possibly be? For you who might consider such things, let me ask you to instead consider replacing how far can I safely go with why am I doing this? To what end am I doing this? For whose glory am I doing this? Taking the focus once again off of ourselves, even off of the gift, and back to the giver of that gift. Because if you've never heard it from a sermon, never heard it from the pulpit, these are the terms in which any discussion of lust must be founded that God loves sex. God loves sex. It's not I'm not trying to be creepy here or anything. I'm just trying to say He has invented sex. He has offered it to us for our pleasure, for our benefit, to reflect that intimate love, that self-sacrificing vulnerability and intimacy that we have been created for one another, for His praise. Not animals who have to simply obey urges and spawn progeny, but privileged to cooperate with God and with one another so that those descendants may come to pass. To be blessed with the pleasure, with the happiness, with the bonds of that conjugal union where we are promised that two become one flesh. And it is a holy gift that the Lord has offered to us. It is a holy gift that comes with a purpose and to an end. First and foremost, for His praise is the giver of all good things. Likewise, for children. Also, for the blessing and benefit that husband and wife might be bound together, intimate with one another, sharing of the deepest, the best, and the most personal, to knit into one. So as companions, as friends, the love that God shows to us first might be reflected in probably its closest and most intimate way in this mortal life. The gift of sex, then, intended for the purpose of the lifelong union of husband and wife through holy matrimony. And yet, so many fall short. And yet, so many disappoint, feel broken by what they've done, what's been done to them, what they see, what they're influenced by. God's intention, God's purpose is this good gift to be used in these good ways, because it's never just sex. To say that, to try to live that way, tries to pull apart body and soul, tries to ignore why we have been given this opportunity, this blessing. To say it's just sex promotes and propagates the lie that some way, somehow, you can give the most intimate and vulnerable part of yourself to someone else and there not be an effect. That's how we're built. And that is what happens. Physical union leads to emotional union, leads to spiritual union, and those bonds make one of what was once two. For those who say, no, I can do it, friends with benefits, or booty calls at night, or whatever it might be, to say, it's just sex, are those who either on purpose or through self-training have chosen to split and bifurcate. Body and soul somehow, some way do not matter. The bonds there are minimal or they are imperceptible. And I say that is done through this training that has deadened your own heart, shrunken your own spirit, impacted your own ability for those bonds to be created. Like the alcoholic who first starts to drink for pleasure or sociability, eventually they start to drink to seek relief. And eventually they drink for no pleasure at all, but just to stay alive. For those who say it is just sex, even the pleasure and good that ought to be had in this good gift is diminished, is shrunken, the pleasure long gone. The act comes perhaps for relief, maybe even just to feel alive, and yet you die just a little, again and again, from the inside out. That which was once pleasurable becomes rote, mechanical, coldly distant. For those bonds have been made, but they've been broken and they've been severed, and it happens again and again, and your own ability to make those bonds is affected. That heart is impacted. Lust in its practical sense is a thief. It steals from us a good that we ought to experience. And it steals something precious and beautiful that rightfully belongs to another. For when you lust, when you let your eye wander and linger, when you ruminate and think, oh, baby, maybe, yeah. Those are emotions and those are feelings, and that is a sensibility owed to a husband or to a wife, whether you are single or whether you are married. They are not yours to give. They are intended to be given freely and in love, but not just anywhere, under any circumstance or to anyone. It steals, it cheats, and it hurts. It hurts by taking from something that belongs to someone else, and it hurts us because it hurts our ability to give where it ought to go. When we allow ourselves to indulge. I can't speak directly to women. I understand it happens differently in men to women. For men, so often it's visual. We see things, look at things. Brain starts churning. The blood starts pumping. For women, I've been told it's more often than not an emotional connection. Happening more through your thoughts and through a fantasy rather than a look or a glance. But I will say that for either of those, lust operates similarly to greed and envy, where we take a real person with real flesh, real blood, real hope, real dreams, real hurts, real needs, and we compress them into a two-dimensional picture that is artificial and that is false. We take someone who's a real person and we transform them into an object. You are not the center of your story, I am. Because when I look into your eyes, I know that you want to give it to me. And you want to give it to me the way that I want it. When I want it and how I want it. For I am the center of your story, the center of mine, the center of this universe. And you exist for my gratification and for my pleasure. It doesn't seem that way. I mean, it doesn't seem like, oh, I can just look at stuff. I can watch that. I can think of things. It's not really, but it is. It has an effect on us, and it dulls us, and it numbs us, and it changes how our interpersonal reactions go. Because real people cannot compete with these artificial images and these fantasies in our heads. An artificial image or a fantasy in our head does everything that we want them to do. feelings of their own. They don't have needs of their own. They exist purely to gratify. I can just be, I can just want, I can just take. Real people with real hurts, real needs, real lives. They're harder, they're more complicated. Love can be difficult and challenging. You're willing to be vulnerable. You just might get hurt. But an image will never hurt you. An image will never let you down. It will never disappoint you. It can just simply exist to give you pleasure. And yet, even that, like the alcoholic, one drink, then it takes 2, then it takes 10. Having to dig deeper and deeper and deeper just to feel anything. Changes you from the inside out. How you even relate one to another, for the heart you try to give has been impacted and changed. No longer tender, no longer open. Train yourself. Either the people are disposable, or the people are objects meant to serve you. Not neighbors, not friends, not a husband, not a wife. Things, objects, slaves. Yet as lust helps us transform real people into our slaves, we become its slave, serving it by giving it more and more and more of ourselves, because it will continue to consume as much as we will give and then ask for more still. I am blessed by a woman who loves me. I am filled with love for her back. And we might reflect the blessing of this love that the Lord has offered to us, and do so with vulnerability, with openness, as I think it ought to be. And yet I'll confess, certainly earlier in our marriage, it wasn't always that way. I think the more you know each other and the more you're around them, the more you're loved by them, the more you will love them. And I love my wife even more now than I did. Didn't seem possible, but it's true. But as I let my own heart stray, as I let my own eye wander, big stuff, again, I'm a simple guy, and I'm too tired for affairs. I don't have the time anyway, but, you know. There was a time, I didn't do anything, no, I'm just looking. There's a time. Well, it's no big deal. I mean, it's just on a computer screen. It's not like it's really going to do anything. It's not like I'm really going to do anything in that. Even that. For when that time came to be fully open, to be fully vulnerable, like Adam and Eve, naked before one another and unashamed, I wasn't. For I had private parts that I covered in shame. Not my body, and my spirit, my heart, my past. And I held back. We missed out. It wasn't a constant thing. There's a period of time. And I want to say, if any of those struggles have been yours or are yours now, God's mercy and grace, they truly are sufficient to redeem even that. Our lives together better than they've ever been. Open and vulnerable and naked. Without shame. For healing can happen. Redemption can come. But to come to grips, this is a precious gift. And I could abuse it. I guess anybody could. But I know that I did. And I'm grateful for His grace. And hers as well. Even on the female side. Maybe not looking at stuff. Maybe not thinking and pondering about seeing Mr. Rock Hard abs. But maybe through a friendship or relationship. Maybe through one of those bodice-ripping paperbacks with the long-haired pirate in the open shirt on the cover. to allow the imagination to wander and to think of this perfect partner who is always there, always supportive, always caring, even if it's not initially sensual or sexual, but to feel fulfillment and that emotional bonding that ought to happen as our bodies and lives are intertwined in marriage. In the whole bed. Private parts are covered. And a real flesh and blood husband or wife is compared to a cardboard cutout that they will never compare to. It is true that real flesh and blood people are never as good as our fantasies. But through the grace of God, if we are truly willing to be vulnerable and to love, they're better than our fantasies. A real person can really love you. And a real person you can really love. That is that quality of Eden that the heart still longs for. To stand before your helpmeet, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, and to do so naked and unashamed. To share in a joy that in and of itself is a gift of God. Partner with Him in those blessings, to the blessings of children. To know that there is someone who accepts you with the flab on your body and the flab in your soul. With hair growing in the wrong places, or maybe not enough in the right ones. With a little work that needs to be done. Find acceptance, openness. They would willingly stand naked before you and offer to you their most private and their most intimate. And together you might glorify God, not as two, but as one flesh. The solution then to these things is God's grace. In singleness or in marriage, there is no circumstance where lust is confined. Therefore, there is no circumstance where grace will not go. In singleness or in marriage, these temptations may come. This damage can be done. To receive that grace and God's healing and transformation, to receive the gift of what it is intended for and how it can be used rightly and well. By rightly and well, I'm actually not going to suggest abstinence. Before that sounds provocative, it shouldn't be. Abstinence, I will say, is a condition quite often of our circumstances. Well, I don't want it. Or I can't get any. I guess I'm abstinent. That takes into account our bodies. It does not take into account our hearts. I propose chastity in singleness and in marriage. Purity of body and soul that says, I have been bought for a price. Neither body nor soul are mine to freely give, except to those whom they belong. To my Maker and my Redeemer, to my husband, to my wife, to our one flesh. For chastity, then purity, holiness, that is a choice of gratitude and of reverence. This is a gift from God, and I honor Him when I use it rightly. I honor my wife, I honor my husband, I honor our marriage, our children, our family, our community. When I'm not just an animal hungry, but I'm a creature who praises his Lord. Since all that we have comes from God, body and spirit, we can offer to Him body and spirit. That I, as a husband, may offer to my wife all that I have, body and spirit. To stand before one another naked and unashamed. to stand before our Lord, who is the bridegroom of we, his church, the bride, and to do so naked and unashamed. For out of love, vulnerability, I give myself to you freely and utterly. And I receive you. I receive your love in that same way. For I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. And it's never too late. In your marriage, in your life, in your relationships yet to come, it's never too late. For while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. While we were yet dead, while we were yet broken, while we were yet perverse, wrong-headed, selfish, great. He died for us. He loves us with a love that is truly vulnerable, sacrificial, all-encompassing, and good. He can and will redeem any and all of those lives, any and all of those private hearts offered to him in gratitude and thanks. Private hearts offered one to another as husband and wife. Private hearts offered to Christ, our holy bridegroom. Offered freely. His flesh is joined in two, becomes one. Private body of mind and of spirit with nothing held back. Naked. Unashamed. Loved. Accepting love shown to us, not for the sake of ourselves, but for the sake of he who loved us first. That is the cure for lust. To remember to whom we truly belong. For indeed, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine.